The start of the year saw Western military action in Mali as French troops led a successful mission to defeat Islamist rebels in the north of the country. Over the border in Algeria, a siege of a gas facility by Islamic militants lasted several days and saw the death of dozens of hostages and 29 kidnappers.
Barack Hussein Obama do solemnly swear.
In Washington, huge crowds gathered to see President Obama inaugurated for a second term in office, following his election victory of 2012. Pope Benedict stunned the world in February as he announced he was standing down due to his advancing age. From the Korean peninsula came the news that North Korea had carried out a new underground nuclear test and seemed on its way to developing a new arsenal. March saw Venezuela say goodbye to its leader of 14 years as Hugo Chavez finally succumbed to his long battle with cancer. White smoke from the Vatican signalled news of a new pope as Argentina's Cardinal Bergoglio became Pope Francis, the first pontiff to hail from Latin America. A new era was also beginning in China as Xi Jinping assumed the presidency. April was dominated by increasing tension over North Korea's nuclear capability and a series of bellicose threats issued against neighbouring South Korea and the USA. Also making headlines was the death of Margaret Thatcher, the former British Prime Minister who passed away at the age of 87. In the USA, there were traumatic scenes when 2 bombs detonated at the Boston Marathon, killing 3 people and injuring more than 170. A dramatic hunt for those responsible ended with 1 suspect shot dead and the 2nd detained. May brought momentous elections in Pakistan that saw the first successful transition from one democratically elected parliament to another in the country's 66-year history. In Turkey began a series of mass protests. Thousands took to the streets calling for the resignation of the country's Prime Minister Erdogan over what they saw as his authoritarian rule. There were similar scenes in Brazil in June when what began as a simple dispute over bus fare rises led to violent clashes and a police crackdown across much of the country. One of the biggest stories of the year broke in June when former US intelligence analyst Edward Snowden was revealed as the source of a number of leaks of highly sensitive US intelligence. And a new chapter was beginning for Iran and its relationship with the rest of the world, following the election of the moderate Hassan Rouhani as the country's new president. Months of protests came to a head in Egypt in July, with the military deposing President Morsi and suspending the constitution in a move they described as an attempt at national reconciliation, but seen by many as a coup. August saw the news of Russia granting asylum to fugitive US intelligence leaker Edward Snowden, provoking fury from the US government. In Egypt, a military crackdown on protesting supporters of the deposed President Morsi led to the loss of many lives and a declaration of a state of emergency. And as the civil war in Syria continued to rage, graphic images emerged seemingly showing evidence of the use of chemical weapons in rebel areas by government forces. The images caused revulsion across the world, but the Assad government denied responsibility for any such attack. Military intervention in Syria by Western powers seemed inevitable in September, before an offer from President Assad to hand over and destroy chemical weapons saw the US and key allies step back from the brink of military action. In Kenya, the siege of a shopping mall in the capital Nairobi by terrorists led to horrific scenes and the death of at least 72 people, with Islamist group Al-Shabaab claiming responsibility. Whilst Iran's new president was seemingly building bridges and making history when he and President Obama held a 15-minute phone conversation, the first between the two countries' leaders in more than 30 years. The US dominated headlines in October from its government shutdown to further revelations on the country's mass surveillance programs, including the phone tapping of German Chancellor Angela Merkel, straining relations with many of its political allies. November saw a momentous breakthrough in negotiations over Iran's nuclear capability when a 6-month deal was struck that would see the halting of uranium production beyond 5%, and UN inspectors granted daily access to enrichment facilities. In exchange, crippling sanctions against the country would be eased. December saw an escalation of mass anti-government protests in Ukraine, largely triggered by a decision not to sign a far-reaching partnership deal with the EU. There were similar scenes in Thailand, where thousands took to the streets and occupied government buildings. After weeks of protests, embattled Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra dissolved parliament and called an election for early next year. The end of the year saw further French military intervention in Africa, this time in the Central African Republic, with troops sent alongside African peacekeepers to restore order after a rebel takeover in March. And the world said goodbye and paid tribute to an iconic figure when South Africa's anti-apartheid leader Nelson Mandela passed away at the age of 95.